and the families of the teenagers who died in the Enyobeni tragedy are still trying to get answers to exactly what led to their deaths. Today, they are bidding farewell to the youngsters at a mass funeral set to get underway at the Scenery Park sports field at around 9 o'clock. But we're asking the question this morning, how does one deal with the loss of a child, especially when they died under such circumstances? Let's bring in the Vice-Chairperson of Patchsa, that's Joan Marston, who joins us via our video link this morning. Joan, it's great to have you with us on the program. Incredibly heartbreaking day for the community there in East London today, Joan. You know, it's difficult to ask, how does one begin to deal with this level of grief? Where would you start answering that question?
Well, I think, first of all, I agree. This is such a heartbreaking day. The loss of a child is the greatest pain that any parent can undergo. And looking for meaning in something like this where there's been no time to prepare. It's not like an illness where you have time to realize the child is getting sicker and sicker. This is a sudden, unexpected, traumatic loss. And your normal society supports that are there fall away because so many in the community are grieving alongside with you. So first of all, to say that no individual's grief is exactly the same. We all grieve. Our grief journeys each differ. And the first thing that we have to do is to allow ourselves to grieve. Allow ourselves to feel the emotion, to feel the anger, to feel the guilt, to feel the despair and the disorientation, and for people around them to allow them to feel that grief. How people often try to cope with picking up the pieces is to try and make meaning out of what has happened. So that meaning, at the moment, you can't see meaning when it's something that has happened so quickly and so severely, and there's such a loss. But later on...
Yeah.
Sorry?
No, continue, Joan.
No, but later on to say, how do we make meaning of the life of this beautiful son or daughter that I had, my sibling, and perhaps do something to memorialize them, whether it's a program, whether it's being an advocate for better facilities for these children. But the only way we can really get through it is to allow ourselves to grieve, to look for that support that is available around us. And while there's professional support, and I know there will be a tremendous amount of that, the main support will come from friends and the community itself. And also to recognize that while the parents are grieving, the siblings will be grieving as well. And where there are small children, there may be what we call magical thinking that they caused it. The parents will be thinking, what did I do wrong? Could I have changed it? Could I have saved them? Is there anything that I can do? And we as individuals and as a community can only stand by them and let them experience their grief and grow through it.
Joan, as you're speaking, we're also bringing our viewers live visuals in East London this morning. It's this procession of 19 vehicles carrying empty coffins, just representing the lives that were lost. From the funeral parlor all the way to Scenery Park sports field. That's where this mass funeral service will be held this morning. Just some context for our viewers, Joan, about what Patchsa is. It stands for Palliative Care for Children of South Africa. And what your organization does is that it helps give support for families and healthcare professionals when it comes to caring for children with life-threatening or life-limiting illnesses. So that's what Patchsa does. When you bring your expertise to the situation that unfolded in East London, and just for the sake of our viewers and for your sake as well, Joan, we still don't have clarity on the cause of death insofar as the deaths of these 21 teenagers is concerned. What does that do to the grieving process, the not knowing?
It actually delays the grieving process because you're so busy looking for answers, looking for reasons, that often you put aside your grief because of this busyness that you're involved with. It also leads to extreme anger because if my child is killed in a car accident, then I can see what the cause was. I know where I can direct my anger. But at the moment, you have feelings and anger and emotions, and you have no place to direct them to. So yes, it is going to make the grief process, which is going to be long, it's going to be complicated, it's going to make it even more difficult.
Joan, you talked about, when it comes to providing palliative care for children with illnesses and life-limiting diseases and so on. There's a grief process to that, right? You are able to say the things that you wanted to say. You're perhaps able to have the experiences, the last words that you would have wanted to have with your loved one. Again, for a situation like this, it happens so suddenly, no explanation. That must add to the grief process as well.
No, absolutely. And we so often say to the parents, write down or say to the child, because I still believe that there's a connection between the living and the dead. And you can talk to the person who's died, and many people do. But yes, it absolutely does. If you've had angry words with your child before they left, it's going to make your guilt feelings even greater. And dealing with the guilt of this kind of loss, I think, is one of the most difficult things, because it wasn't the parents' fault. It wasn't their fault at all. What happened was a series of circumstances at the tavern that led to the death. But unfortunately, this kind of occurrence does lead to deep feelings of guilt, and guilt leads to anger. And there is going to be complicated grieving for these families for a long time.
Yeah. And as you say, there is hopefully a support structure in place for the people involved in this tragedy, the families, of course, the loved ones of these teenagers, but also for the friends who were perhaps with them at the tavern and who may have survived the tragedy. What kinds of feelings would they be dealing with?
Well, often it's survivor's guilt. We talk about survivor's guilt, and we see it in siblings who survive after a child has died. One of their siblings has died, and they think, why did I live and my little brother died? And we're going to see this in these children who survived this terrible, terrible tragedy as well. And they're going to need long-term help and support. But I think one thing we've got to realize is that professional help is absolutely essential. Circles of support, but at the end of the day, the main support is going to come from friends and from the community, from their faith communities, and I think from us as a larger South African community as well.
Yeah. And of course, the loss of a child is not something you get over, is it, Joan?
No,
it is perhaps more something that you come to terms with and learn to live with?
Yes, I've actually walked that journey myself over many years, and what I can say from personal experience as well as from 33 years of working with these children is that it's not a thing you get over. It's something that you learn to accept and you learn to live with, but the grief does come back even when you think you've gone through the whole grieving process and you've come to a fact that you've accepted. Something will trigger it. And this is something the parents will have to know, and the siblings as well. That there are triggers, there are birthdays, there are events that you think your child could have taken part in. There are times when they could have matriculated or got married. So I think these parents need to know as well that there's no end to love. And if there's no end to love, there's no end to grief as well. But you can learn to live with it, you can learn to accept it, and you can make meaning out of it by doing something to memorialize your child.
Joan Marston, some incredible advice from you there. And of course, painful as it is, good to get your perspective as the Vice-Chairperson of an organization like Patchsa, but also as someone who has walked that painful journey of losing a child. Thank you so much for weighing in on this discussion.